Here. Well, the new people don't know me. I'm Cindy Spencer. I've been a member here since sometime in the 60s. I don't know exactly whenever we moved to Hardinsburg, and Dudley Fish was the reverend at the time. That's pretty much all I remember about it. But yeah, I started getting into the church history because I wanted to write something for where did we come from? Where did this church come from? And I wanted it to be something that we could keep in the archives, which, by the way, the next administrative board meeting, we need to talk about this. Our archives consist of going up to the attic and opening up a box and pulling out things like this. And I also found, while I was delving and trying to find some history, I found some newspaper clippings from the early 1900s that I took home quickly, and I laminated them so that they would survive a few more years. And I'm going to be leaving some of this stuff up on the front table after I finish so that you can kind of look at it and see the real thing. And I think, Susan, you have some stuff for people to look at too.
Just a picture.
Some pictures.
Just
yeah.
a picture, one.
Okay, so with no further ado, we shall get into the history of the Hardinsburg Methodist Church. We didn't become united for several years. Reverend James Taylor was licensed to preach at the Mount Zion Methodist Episcopal Church, and he got the call to preach, and that is where he was placed. And he decided to move his family in February of 1828. He decided to move his family. Whoa, 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 stop. What did I do wrong? Okay. Oh, now. All right. I guess I held that one too long. Technology. But anyway, so then in February of 1828, James Taylor decided to move to the village of Hardinsburg, and he brought his young family with him. And when he got to the village of Hardinsburg, it's not quite like it is today. It was the local center for gambling and drunkenness and crime and, well, just general immorality. And so he thought maybe he needed to maybe make some changes. The only church in Hardinsburg at that time was St. Romulus, which we know is St. Romuald now, but it was St. Romulus, and that was the only church there was. So he felt like he could make a difference. And so he decided to face this challenge of immoral people in Hardinsburg and pull them together and try to save them. So in July the 5th, he gathered up some people that he talked into coming to his house, and he started the first Methodist Society in Hardinsburg, July the 5th of 1828 in his home. Things were going along okay, and then he just wasn't getting a whole lot of souls to save, so in the fall, he gathered up some people to help him. Marcus Lindsay, who was the presiding elder for the Salt River District, Stephen Harper from Meade County, Silas Lee, and Jack Stiff from Hardin County all got together for this evangelistic crusade. And during this revival, they helped 66 persons to convert. And that kind of got the ball rolling, and for every prayer meeting from that time on, they had somebody was converted every Sunday from then on for many, many years to come. As a side note on Reverend Taylor, he had a daughter named Jenny, and in 1867, her married name is McHenry. In 1867, she used the pen name Rosine and wrote a book of poems entitled Forget Me Not. And then 6 years later, in 1873, the town and post office of Pigeon Roost, Kentucky, renamed their town Rosine in her honor. That's one of those side notes you can, when you do all this history searching, that was just one of the side notes that came up. Well, that's pretty interesting that our first Methodist preacher's daughter has the town named in her honor. I did okay there. Okay. So from 1828 until 1843, there was no church building. When we had church services, we went over to the courthouse, which was a common thing then, either a schoolhouse or a courthouse to have your church services. So decided it was time to have a church. They had gotten enough persons in the church, in their society, that they felt like they could afford to get ready to start building a church. So for the sum of $1, 1/4 acre of land was purchased by the trustees of the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Masonic Hall, which was the north half of Inn Lot number 14, fronting on Main Street 52 feet 3 inches and extending back westwardly the whole length of the lot 209 feet. So to kind of give you I like visual, I'm a visual person. First Street is this next street down, and where, I'm not sure what his name is, that lives there. It seems like the WXBC people talk about him all the time. Used to be a fireman. Anyway, that house was Timmy Simmons, thank you. Okay. Where Timmy Simmons' house is now, Richard May, not the same house, Richard May lived there. And when Richard May, right next to Richard May's house was his garden. And it was a fairly large garden from what I'm reading, and he would grow his vegetables in the summer, and in the fall he would let his pigs into there, and then they would feed on his garden leftovers until the winter, and then he would kill the hogs and have them for the rest of the winter. That was just another side story I thought was interesting. So right next to where we built our first church building, then next to it was Sally Sutton's millinery store, which I didn't know what millinery was, so I had to look that up. This woman created hats. She made hats. And then next to Sally Sutton's millinery store was the Linen Hotel, and then after that was an alleyway, and then there was a jail. So that's the whole side of the street over there, if you can kind of envision what that looked like at that time. But we had a beautiful, beautiful church. And in my searches through the archives, I found a newspaper article by Ruth Miller Withers. This was in 1970, where she described that side of the road, what it looked like. And when she got to the Methodist church, this is what she said. The beautiful old Methodist church with its sturdy brick walls and 6 large columns reaching from the 12-foot brick patio to the top of the building. I had a little difference of opinion with her there because I only see 4 columns on our church, but that was her memory that was serving her there. You entered by the 2 large front doors. At the left was a stairway leading to the Masonic Lodge, and on the right a stairway leading to a balcony that was used by slaves during the Civil War. The aisles down each side of the church with a grass carpet runner, and always an amen corner where the older men sat that didn't hear very well. That's where we would put wrong. This whole church was a thing of beauty, and Hardinsburg lost something of value when it was sold and converted into a skating rink and later destroyed. According to the deed dated April 13th of 1843, the building now erecting, the lower story to be finished for the express purpose of a place of worship for the use of the members of the Methodist Episcopal Church, according to the rules of discipline which from time to time may be agreed upon and adopted by the ministers and preachers of said church. The second story in the building to be finished for the express use and purpose of Masonic Hall. Well, I couldn't figure out, you all probably already know this, but I had no idea why on earth did we go in cahoots with the Masonic Hall and build a building. But that was just common, that the Masons always had their meetings on a second story of usually a church, and they usually didn't have windows, and you know, I didn't know all this, so I have really learned a lot. So if any of you didn't know that, that's why we shared the church building with the Masons. At that time, B.A. Basham was our pastor. Then for 1843, we got our first church building, and then in 1844 was General Conference. And I don't know how many of you have ever gone to a General Conference. No, the preacher always has to go. Is the preacher the only one who goes to General Conference from a church? Oh, okay. I've never gone to one, obviously. But 1844 was General Conference, and there was a lot of unrest in the North and the South at that time. This was leading up to the time of the Civil War. And Kentucky was considered a border state, you know, could go either way. And of course, Abraham Lincoln was convinced that Kentucky was going to be which way we went. But Kentucky was split on the issues of slavery. And at that time, about 20%, almost 20% of Kentucky's population were slaves. And it was just an issue. It was a big issue. And so then when we went into the 1844 General Conference, they had pretty much a trial of Bishop James Andrew from the Methodist Episcopal Church. He was, 12 years earlier, he was elected to be a bishop by the General Conference, and at that time he was not a slaveholder. According to most of the reading that I've kind of tried to get all the information I could on this man, but most accounts are that he never actually bought a slave. He was left a slave by one of his wives, and she was a girl, and when she was 18, he told her, "You can go, you're free. I don't want to own you. You can," and she didn't have anywhere to go, and she said, "Please let me stay." And so he said, "Okay, you can come as go as you please," but he was still considered a slave holder because she lived on his property, and she did work there. I mean, she was trying to earn her keep. He had another slave, according to another account, he had another slave. It was because someone gave the slave to him, and so he never actually bought a slave, but he was a slave holder. And so at the General Conference, they were not real happy with the fact that they had a bishop who was a slave holder. And so that it generated a lot of controversy within the Methodist Episcopal Church. And so, get to the next slide here. The real issue in 1844 was whether or not the Methodist Episcopal Church would accept or disapprove of slavery. Northern delegates to the 1844 General Conference sponsored a resolution asking Bishop Andrew to desist from exercising in the Episcopal office so long as he owned slaves. In other words, they were asking him to step down on his own. Southern delegates countered that the church would be destroyed in states which prohibited emancipation. Nevertheless, the resolution passed by a vote of 110 to 69. A plan of separation between Northern and Southern Methodists resulted. The picture that you see up here is actually a copy of, it's the history of the Great Secession from the Methodist Episcopal Church in the year 1845. Very interesting reading. It's an account by Reverend Charles Eliot, who was requested by the General Conference, since there was so much conflict in the North and the South, and in the Methodist Church at that time, they wanted a written account of everything that happened. And this book is several hundred pages, but it's hard to read, but yet there's some interesting things that came out of it. But if you ever get a chance to get a copy of the history of the Great Secession, it's really interesting reading. So all of this happened, and the Southern sympathizers and obviously the slaveholders of Kentucky were not real happy with the General Conference, and so bad things happened. And in 1845, even from 1844, from the General Conference up till 1845, for about a year, the Southerners really didn't like all the bad stuff that was going on, the discord between the North and the South, and they tried to get the harmony back going, but it just wasn't going to happen. The Northerners said, "Forget you, pretty much we are just not going to," there was no halfway point. It was like, you just cannot be a slaveholder, you cannot be a Southern circumcised, you just can't, period. So the Southerners, there were more Southerners in Kentucky than there were Northerners. So in May 14th, 1845, the Southern states met in Louisville, Kentucky, and they made the decision to divide from the Methodist Episcopal Church. And they organized they separated from the General Church, and then they organized a new Methodist branch called the Methodist Episcopal South. So we have the Methodist Episcopal, which is the North, and the Methodist Episcopal South. And a long time passed. So this is what happened in the States and then in Kentucky. long time before anything happened in Hardinsburg. As a matter of fact, from 1845, when all this took place, when the separation took place, it was 1869 before the people in Hardinsburg decided to kind of follow along. So in our church, most of the people were South, and the church was named the Hardinsburg Methodist Church South because that's where our church went when they went with the conference. They went with the Southern. And Reverend Taylor came back to town and he said, "I'm really not happy with this, and I think we need to go to not be a Southern church." And a few of the people, some of the people agreed, and they left the church and decided to make their own church. And so they joined with the General Conference in Louisville at that time to be with the North. So since the majority was the Southern, they stayed in the church, and the other ones that went with Reverend Taylor went elsewhere. And so what they did, get to the next slide, I didn't get that quick enough. They met, I couldn't find out where they met for quite a while somewhere, and I don't know where, but eventually in 1871, there was a 2-year span there. In 1871, they bought town lots 37 and 45 for the sum of $200 by the trustees of the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Northern Branch. And this property was on Hardin Street, next to the old cemetery. Does everybody know where the old cemetery is? You know what I'm talking about? I didn't really delve into it until I got into this, and I walked through the cemetery. It's very interesting going through that old cemetery. But the church was over there, and they named the church, it was a white frame church, as you can see in the picture, and they named it Taylor's Chapel, after, obviously, Reverend Chapel. At that time, the trustees for the church in Taylor's Chapel were William Stiff, Williamson Cox, James Haswell, Morris Eskridge, Gideon P. Jolly, and Jebby Kinchelow. Most of the people that were left in the Southern church were Beards and Hooks and what have you. In this church, Vivian and I keep pointing to that church over there because it was the same building. Vivian and Vitula Daniel, they lived at Ivy Hill, which I know it as the Paul Pace house. I think Lowell Macy. Does Lowell Macy still live there? I don't know. In the house, which is right next to Ivy Hill Cemetery. Well, anyway, that big, huge house belonged to Vivian and Vitula Daniel, and their daughter Tula, also Vitula, was very active in the mission cause and in the Louisville Conference, and that's a picture of her. And one of our circles here at the church is named after her, Vitula Daniels. But they stayed with the Methodist Episcopal South. And across the street from the Daniels family, across the street from the Pace house, was the family of Judge Jesse White Kinchelow. And he had a family of 9. It was a big family. And they were ardent supporters of Taylor's Chapel. So we had the North and we had the South, living right across the street from each other. And 2 of his daughters, Judge Kinchelow's daughters, were married to Southern Methodist preachers, and a 3rd daughter was a Southern sympathizer. So I'm sure it was a lot of arguments that went on in his family. But the story goes that Judge Kinchelow would walk with his family to the corners down here. I guess that would be back that way, right there. And he would say goodbye to his Southern sympathizing daughters as they went straight to come up to the church over here, and he would turn right to go to Taylor's Chapel. I'm sure times were hard then. I just can't even imagine all of the controversy that was going on. But also in the reading that I was doing, the people, the Southern and Northern branches stayed friendly. It's not like they were arguing all the time. They tried to stay friendly and not get kind of vicious.
Cindy, what church is that there?
Oh, this is not church. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. That's Daniel's store, the Fatula and Vivian and Fatula Daniel, I think. That's the best I can get. It's called Daniel's store, so I have to assume that that must be the Vivian and Fatula Daniel store. By the way, if anybody has any questions, don't, not that I can answer them, but...
Well, that store is in the corner where our church is now. That store there is right in the corner where our church is.
Where this one is right now? Yeah. Okay, this is the article I was telling you about that I went home and laminated really quickly. It was the age of the church across the street here had gotten to the point where people were ready for a new church. So it's very interesting. In 1903, this is January of 1903, and we'll read a little excerpt here from this because I love the way they wrote back then. The Methodist Church south of this place is to have a new house of worship. Last Sunday morning, after an excellent sermon by Bishop H.C. Morrison of Louisville, a very successful effort was made to raise the money with which to erect an elegant new church house. When contributions were called for by Bishop Morrison, the people in the congregation at once responded. Bishop Morrison first made the statement that he was authorized by a citizen of the town to state to the members of the church that he, the citizen, would subscribe $1,000 when other contributions amounted to $4,000. Mr. B.F. Beard followed this statement with a contribution of $1,000, and the ball then started rolling in earnest. In less than 1 hour, $6,318.50 was subscribed. The people responded hurriedly with liberal contributions, and the amount subscribed exceeded by over $1,000 that which was asked for. I can't imagine at this day and time that happening. I mean, this is 1903, and mostly beards up here. Beard, BF Beard, $1,000. GW Beard, $1,000. CL Beard, $1,000. It's just $500, $250, $100, and they, in that one sermon, got enough more than they asked for to build a new church. So obviously, they were up and running and ready for a brand new church. They bought, obviously, as we know, they bought the corner lot here on Main and 2nd Street, and then the building was there that they destroyed to build this one. And then in 1904, they had their first service on August the 2nd of 1904. The first service, and if you notice in the picture, there's a fence all the way around. Well, actually it's a line drawing, but there's a fence all the way around, and that's before the basement was dug, so there's no entrance down there to the basement, and the doors were wood. But other than that, it looks exactly the same as it is now. The total cost, even though they thought they could build this for $5,000, when they got done and everybody had their say on what they wanted to be in that church, it ended up costing $10,000 to build this church. So, they needed to make up the difference. And, whoops, I went too fast. They needed to make up the difference, and so they had another service in 1905, since they still owed a little bit of money. And I have another newspaper clipping on that, but it pretty much says, May 16th, 1905. Doubtless the rain kept away hundreds from Hardinsburg Sunday, but still other hundreds came, and the church was crowded to its capacity by those who wanted to hear Bishop Morrison. Well, Bishop Morrison came back again, let's raise some money. At the close of his sermon, which as usual was one of great power, the question of lifting the $3,500 indebtedness was submitted to the congregation. Now remember, it's only been 2 years since only $2,100 was raised, and they still had a debt of $1,400. The dedication of the church was deferred. They eventually came up with enough money to get out of debt, but they didn't have another dedication here. So, then in 1913 was the Great Fire of Hardinsburg, and as you can see, it was a great fire. I'm sure many of you have seen this picture before, but it's amazing how devastating it was. But again, as you can see in the picture, and I love visuals, The only damage that we had was to the steeple, and that was
Sandy,
repaired.
you have a laser pointer on that on the.
Do I really? Where?
Very top button.
Did I give you this? Is that right? Did I donate this to the church? I can't tell because I don't remember anything. Oh, cool! Look! Ron told me a few minutes ago, he says, "You're the one who donated this, don't you?" Oh gosh, but anyway, this was on May 14th in 1913, and 14 businesses were destroyed, and the total loss was estimated at $185,000. According to a newspaper article, a notable fight saved the Farmers Bank and the new Methodist Church. But thank goodness it didn't burn us down. But that wasn't to last. Then in 1933, I couldn't find a picture of our fire, but in 1933, we did burn. And our total loss was $10,000. It was February the 5th, and it was on a cold, probably similar to today, Sunday afternoon. And firefighters from Hardinsburg and Cloverport worked for over 4 hours trying to put the fire out. The only thing, the interior was completely destroyed, and the only thing that they saved was the Holy Communion set. In the 1933 quarterly conference records of this book, the preacher back then didn't have a computer, and he actually had to write everything that went on. Every quarter he had to write how the state of the church, it was the state of the church address. But this is the 1933 records, and submitted May 27th. He talks about the finances being behind, and in earlier ones, he talks about his wife a lot. She evidently had a lot of illness. But anyway, then of course we could be doing better than we are, and blah, 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 and we're in bad times. But then we get to the last paragraph here. Since the loss of our church at Hardinsburg, we have secured the courthouse and will hold our regular services and Sunday school there. We are facing all our difficulties with all the courage we can command. We know that there will be some way out, and the kingdom's work will be carried on by the help of our Lord and Master. Submitted E.P. Duncan. This is old. We need to put this in the archive somewhere. This is very interesting reading, though, to see how our church was doing and how things were at the time.
Sandy, did it mention the cause of the fire?
No, there were. In a couple of different places, they thought it was because of it was a cold day, and the furnace, and not a furnace, it wasn't a furnace, it was like a wood stove, coal stove, whatever. Who knows though for sure? I mean, it could have been a candle in the window, just like we could have burned our church down a couple of years ago. But anyway, okay. So we've gone through a lot of turmoil over the last 50, 60 years. You know, we've built a new church, and then the next year part of them move off, and then we've gone through this downtown fire, and then our church burns, and oh gosh, it's just and then finally we decided, hey, let's just mend our fences. In 1939, the Civil War is way past. You know, it's time for. And this is not just Hardinsburg, this is everywhere. It's time for the churches to get back together. And so it was decided that since this was a newer and nicer building, that Taylor's Chapel would close and that they would move over, that the people of the church would move to this church, and we would all be together again. And so they had, in September of 1939, the Taylor's Chapel people had a farewell service, and then they had dinner on the grounds for the last time. And they sold their building to a church known as Freedom. Now, I don't know if that church is still in existence. I didn't go into that. I tried to it was really hard to just stay just with our church when there's so many different ways to go. In 1940, the Women's Society of Christian Service was formed, and eventually that all kind of turned into what we are now, but there was all kinds of little women's societies. And 80 women signed on the charter. It's so hard for me now. They talk about hundreds coming to the church services, and 80 women signed up to be in the ladies' auxiliary and the preaching service. But anyway, cooking by these women was used as a money-making venture. Well, we haven't heard of that before, have we? And they were able to make sizable donations to the church because of their cooking talents. And also around this time was the Wesleyan Service Guild that was formed, and one of their projects was the marker at Miss Tula Clay Daniels' grave, by Tula Clay Daniels. And Dave and I tromped around in that cemetery until we found it, and that's the marker that the Wesleyan Service Guild was able to purchase and place in her honor at her gravesite. Then in 1951, and Wayne Macy sent me these pictures, and I have just gone over them with a fine-tooth comb. I just think they're fascinating. Again, here we are with the, oh goodness, I've got the little pointer. There we are, right there, and right next to that, to the left, is the firehouse, and next to that is, it was the Neha Bottling Company, and then later I went and got schooled by the men's Sunday school class, and they said that later it was C.D. Lucas's Plymouth dealership, which is Benny Glasscock's dad, which I didn't know that. But anyway, at this time, this is in 1951, a full basement was dug under our church by volunteers. I'm talking, I don't mean we got a track hole in there. People literally went in with shovels by the wagon, I mean by the wheelbarrow, thank you so much. Wheelbarrow load, and took it out. And I was talking to Charlie Bennett about that and asking how much, if he remembered it. He most definitely remembered it. And he said a couple of people, just off the top of his head, that he remembered the McGarry brothers didn't actually help, but they loaned their equipment for this to take place. Franklin Bright, Jim Ames, Wilbur Williams, Brick Beard, just a few of the people, that he could think of on top of his head that helped literally dig this out. He said it took probably 3 or 4 months for them to dig it out and get it braced up. And then they built the, well, as you all know, we've been downstairs before, there's Sunday school rooms down there, and then the kitchen and all that. And then in 1957, we built the Sunday school edition, which is, it included 2 bathrooms. If you remember the old Sunday school rooms up there, I don't think we have any Sunday school room classes up there now, but there are 3 Sunday school rooms, and there's a bathroom, and then directly below that we have the bathroom, and then we have where the office is now. That was built on in 1957. And then in 1968, Glendine, which was established in the 1880s, a bustling town, like a lot of our little satellite towns were, because of a railroad. They were hustling and bustling. A couple hundred people lived there. And they held their services in the schoolhouse, along with the Baptist people also had theirs in the schoolhouse. And then in 1903, John Dean donated land for the express purpose of building a Methodist Church Episcopal South, and which they did. And then the railroad closed, and the rest of the story, people start moving away whenever the railroad is gone, and people began moving to the bigger towns, and so the church kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And Robert Norman is one of the original members of Glendine. I'm sure you remember the membership is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So anyway, then on July 6, 1958, the Glendine Methodist Church was closed, the property was sold, and the membership moved to the Hardinsburg Methodist Church. And at that time, Owen Hoskinson was the pastor here at the church. And that picture up there is of the Glendine building. And you all have on your table one of these little charts I'm showing you. This shows you the evolvement of where we were and where we are now. In 1968, we became the Hardinsburg United Methodist Church, because it was a combination of, the last 2 we have is the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church. That was the last 2 remaining out of as far back as we could go, and so we pick up the word united from those and then add it to the Methodist Church, and that's where we are today. We became the United Methodist Church in 1968, and Dudley Fish was the pastor at that time. Like I said earlier, that's the one I remember. It's kind of hard to understand it at first, but I was kind of hoping that me talking about it would kind of help you understand where all of this came from, where we came from. And then in the next big thing that kind of happened, we had, and I don't have a slide for this, we had our anniversary, and 78, thank you, because I didn't write that down and I didn't have a slide for it. I didn't think about it until I got this all done. I was like, I forgot all about our celebration that we had in 78. That was when Lamar Mattingly was here. But anyway, then in 1988, 10 years later, another, we try to have something going on every decade or so. We bought a new parsonage. We tore down the parsonage that was out here. It was so old and in such disrepair that it wasn't worth fixing up anymore and putting Band-Aids on it anymore. So it was torn down, and we purchased a property in Breckwood, which we still have. It's the first house on the right going into Breckwood Lower Drive. And that was when Fred Whitmore was the pastor at that time. And then I'm just kind of want to show you a picture from the 50s to the 70s, the change. As you can see, this is just a close-up of where we were a while ago. There's the church, there's the firehouse, and there is the old Lehigh Bottling Company. And then when we get up to the 70s, I think there was a bakery there, and then Madeline's Carpet was there, but by that time the Lehigh Bottling Company was gone, and Billy Davis's furniture store moved in, or it was a new building in somewhere in the mid-50s, according to Bob Haynes, who used to work for him. He thinks it was probably mid-50s when it was built. And then, of course, that house we all know. So for today, all of that is gone from the church over, and this took its place. And that, the land which was purchased, and we built the Memorial Hall, and that was in 1996, and at that time Wayne Sayre was our pastor. And that is the end of that. Any questions? I think I told you everything I know.